So thanks to everyone for joining today. As Li-Shun has already said, the main catalyst for this seminar is our FHMTDG project. One of the first stages that we had planned is to have some kind of consultation among the project members who are in all of the departments in the faculty about some kind of common reference or framework for sharing our ideas, our experiences, our in-class teaching practices. Not just sharing them though, the website will be very effective for that, but coordinating, planning, and ultimately evaluating. I think that many of you who are joining have heard of a lot of these frameworks, and they're used in various ways in different contexts, different kinds of programs all over the world. So as Li-Shun and I were taking an initial look at this, we realized there might not be a common agreement about the usefulness of all of these frameworks, or which ones we should use, or even what they mean, how they're interpreted. So the immediate kind of practical purpose of this seminar is for the project members to have a look and get on the same page with respect to a framework that we think is most useful as a reference. So we thought we would just take a little bit of time to introduce the big picture of how these different frameworks came to be and how they've been used in different contexts, and to begin to make some determination about which of the framework or frameworks would be most suitable for our purpose. And I hope it would be useful for some other programs or projects as well. So the first thing we're talking about here is frameworks for planning innovation. So I thought we just start with a kind of dictionary definition of innovation. The introduction of novelties, the alteration of what is established, a change made in the nature or fashion of anything, something newly introduced, novel practice, method. So something interesting about the dictionary definition here is that it doesn't have any kind of positive or negative connotation. It's very neutral. But in education, this has been used as kind of a catchword for anything positive, anything good, anything useful. But I think it's a question worth examining if every innovation, in fact, is really useful for the community or the organization. Why innovate? The kind of general consensus is that these innovations, technology, may be the seed of some kind of institutional growth that aligns it with new practices. And that if organizations aren't innovating, then they are gradually becoming obsolete. Even very prestigious, successful organizations, communities, establishments might slowly become obsolete if they're not keeping up with the needs of the stakeholders. So there's a little video here about what is innovation. I won't show this. We've included quite a few slides here as a reference, because this presentation will be shared on our faculty website and available to everyone. So some of these are just for your future reference if you want to dig a little bit deeper. We normally agree in terms of pedagogical practices that there are a lot of innovations that are occurring in waves internationally in terms of the transformation of the identity of the teacher, what is the role of the teacher, and what is teaching. Teaching as performance is a very conventional notion, and now teachers wear many hats. Even the meaning and definition of the content and the role of the students have been changing for a long time, so much so that some of you may look at these alternative notions, what we sometimes call innovations, and feel like some of these are actually getting stale now, because in some contexts and some practices, they've been around even for decades. It's just that change comes at a different pace in different places, but they're worth reviewing.
What is innovation?
Okay, I won't play the video now. Okay, but in terms of our project trying to reach a consensus across different departments, different content areas, among different faculty teaching very different courses, we want to have some common seeds or notions of what is innovation. So we keep it initially kind of abstract and suggest that some notional seeds of innovation
Where
might
did you find
include
this?
to increase efficiencies in teaching, to recontextualize learning, often to bring authentic context or international context more directly into the classroom. Of course, in online teaching, we're recontextualizing learning. Developing skill sets for new possibilities, for new employment opportunities to meet new social demands, for example. Enhancing interactions across traditional divides. So more authentic and effective interaction among peer groups, or among peer groups at different institutions and organizations, or international collaboration and sharing. There's all kinds of traditional obstacles which were practical, which can be bridged using innovative technologies. So articulating and exchanging independent ideas, so a freer exchange of students' own independently developed ideas, and of course, the creation of new content. So moving content creation from the professionals or the curriculum providers to the course developers, to individual teachers, and then to students. So reconceptualizing how we think of the content of a course is facilitated by these technologies. But there are always problems. So this is why we have the seminars and the projects and the effort at sharing through websites and different technologies is to be as well acquainted with each other's practice as we can be. I think that all of these will be familiar to us to some extent. So aversion to change or risk. I remember one of my first consultancies in Hong Kong many years ago. I was invited to review a curriculum at a Band 3 school, which was using a textbook that was really designed for university-bound elite learners. And so I suggested to the panel chair that they needed to have a new textbook. And she looked at me aghast and said, "You're so radical." And I thought that was about the most conservative suggestion that I could make. But they'd been using the textbook for a long time and they were very comfortable using it. So they were reluctant to change the textbook. So there's all kinds of disincentives. Other priorities exist at our university and other places that may not incentivize the innovations or some of the adoption of practices which may be useful, may be practical, may meet some of those earlier objectives, but may not be the first priority. Another obstacle which actually exists in my experience in undergraduate and graduate education in the United States, actually more than in Hong Kong, is a very siloed curriculum where content areas and pedagogies are actually in different faculty and very divided. So this can inhibit to some extent the communication and development of pedagogical content knowledge. It's left more to the individual student to do this. So we see this in different degrees in Hong Kong as well. And so also dissipation or attrition of isolated effort. So we have a lot of colleagues who are taking initiatives and have many good practices, but it's not always sustainable if it's not adopted by the program or supported in various ways. So of course, policy shortcomings may be a factor, and just the lack of coordination in terms of the direction and the pace of progress. So how do we address this in terms of overcoming some of these obstacles and systematically planning for the adoption of innovations? So there's, of course, a lot of research on this. And some of the meta-analyses suggest that you really need a kind of multifaceted approach, but there are principles that emerge which suggest that programs need to have some standalone technology courses where the focus is really on some of the technology, some of the practices, some of the just basic literacies when it comes to new technologies and apps. And then second is embedded instructional strategies in all of the courses. So there may be technology courses, also in the methodology courses, and in the content courses as well. And so we've seen encouragement for this practice here at our university in the Blue 1 and Blue 2 projects, for example, encouraging everybody to develop some blended learning practice. And then finally, the field experience opportunities. So this is another factor where student teachers have their initial teaching experience. They have to be both encouraged, supported, and obligated to begin this process of integration of new technologies into their own practice before their professional skills begin to solidify. So we know that it's actually much easier for the new generation of teachers to take up these practices. So this, so we break this down into like a 4-stage process where we have initially something all of us can do is to integrate IT in meaningful, authentic, and contextualized ways as models for our students, many or most of whom are pre-service teachers. And then secondly, we have the standalone courses that I mentioned. So in the EL programs, for example, we have the Integrating IT and ESL course, which in fact Li Xun developed many, many years ago and has evolved through many generations, constantly adapting and trying to keep up with all of the changes that have been happening over the years. And of course, these standalone courses exist in the math programs, majors, and IT, and other programs as well, Chinese, across the university. So we also have to see something which we don't see as much of in a systematic way, is embedded in programs where the outcomes of the programs and all of the courses have some consideration of the effective integration of innovative practices of IT components. So for example, in some of the language programs, in addition to the course outcomes, we have language outcomes, because that's fundamental to the efficacy of a language teacher. We might consider technology as a kind of parallel to this, where at least each course outline can consider how important technology is to the outcomes of that individual course. And then more and more student opportunity, not just in courses and FE, but also inviting students to participate in projects alongside our faculty TDG projects and our knowledge transfer projects and our community service projects and so on. So getting students involved in real contexts and authentic use of IT. So these are all stages of planning that based on the research suggests that might be necessary or important components of planning forward. So there's a lot of examples of this. We're just throwing out a few that Li Xun and I are familiar with from our departments or our experience here. Some of these have been picked up by faculty and even university. The use of ePortfolio was first piloted in the English department about 10 years ago. And some of you will remember we used to have files that the students would drop off at our office a week or two after they finished FE, and we would flip through the pages and mark them up. So the ePortfolio has been used for a long time now, and it's been recognized by UGC as one of our university's most effective practices. So this is something that has kind of grown over time. And there are a lot of these. You know, Li Xun is involved in a number of other projects that are encouraging us to try out innovations and giving us platforms for sharing, like Blue2 projects, some of which are listed here. And Li Xun will also have a chance to spotlight a course which has a good example of integration of IT and innovative practices, his Introduction to Linguistics course. So he'll talk about that a little bit later. But as suggested earlier, these isolated practices, while in and of themselves may be useful for particular courses and even a good model to some of the students who take it, the sharing of these practices in terms that can help departments, faculty, and university colleagues to make connections to their own programs and content may not always be as effective as it might be. So this is what brings us to the reason for having some reference, shared reference, or framework. So similar to even lesson objectives, but core objectives in curriculum planning, program and graduate outcomes, these IT integration frameworks allow stakeholders to plan, share practice, conduct evaluation, and chart progress. Now, all of these things hypothetically can be done without one elegant framework, but I think in terms of communication and having a common reference, they, you know, evidence is they certainly facilitate this practice, even when there's some real shortcomings and problems or ambiguities in the frameworks themselves. They still serve some pragmatic purposes. So our reason for recommending them. Okay. So they work to provide this kind of map or common language across different staff members, colleagues, courses, program components, and over time. So let's have a quick look at some of the most popular and often used frameworks in teacher education practices and professional development practices internationally. So these include TPACK, SAMR, TIM, SQD, and PICRAT. And we'll just have a kind of quick survey, and then Li Xun will focus on one at the end of the presentation, and we can invite you also to share your experience if you are familiar with using any of these frameworks and how effective or not that they were in your experience. So the one that most people are familiar with and has been around for a long time is TPACK. And there's a good reason that it has gained a lot of traction, is because it built on a very sound foundation in teacher education, which is Lee Schulman of Stanford University's concept of pedagogical content knowledge, where we do not think of the content of a course and the process of teaching it as separate entities, that there are actually processes and pedagogies which are more effective for some content, for some major areas than others. And a very careful and systematic analysis of this is going to be very important. So we have the methodology courses where we try to synthesize this. And so the TPACK introduces the concept of technological fluency, competency, knowledge into this mix of pedagogical content knowledge, and is represented in this familiar graph with the outside circle being the context. So obviously this is why we keep it in the abstract, because the details are going to vary a lot from context to context. I won't show the video. Again, that's for your reference. It's very useful for professional development in schools, and a very nice introduction that includes a lot of specific examples of each of the overlapping areas in this Venn diagram. So that's just there for your reference. I think more to the point of what is really useful is some of the questions that can be asked in the development of programs and courses. And these questions go really to the heart of where there is overlap in the TPACK diagram. So, you know, starting with each of these areas in isolation, what content does this lesson focus on? What pedagogical practices are most effective or useful for this lesson? And what technology is used or can be used or should be used? And then in turn, looking at the overlap of each one of these and considering the relationship between them. So how does pedagogy make the introduction of concepts from this particular area more effective or foster deeper learning? And same question with technology. So does the technology actually represent the content in ways that maximize the learning of this content? And so, you know, on and on, it's a systematic way to have some consultation or discussion about what would be the most effective practices in different courses and areas of a program or major. So TPACK is still going strong. It's been around about close to 15 years now, and looks like a slight drop off in the publications that are using TPACK as an analysis or describing practices in TPACK here, but still a very popular framework. But in the meantime, in these 15 years, other frameworks have also been developed and are gaining some traction. So a second one, which many of you might be familiar with, is SAMR, which takes a very different kind of frame of reference from TPACK, and was one of the first to consider the process of professional development and curriculum development and how technology innovations might impact the curriculum or professional practices over time. So the essential idea here is that starting at the, let me use the pointer, is starting at the bottom of the graph. Technologies are often used to as a simple substitute, maybe in some ways just a more efficient or cost-saving approach. And then by the use of these technologies, we discover that some practices are enhanced or augmented. And then there's this threshold that is indicated in the SAMR framework that we cross from enhancement to transformation. So that's when things really start to change in a significant way. The task is redesigned for new possibilities and ultimately for possibilities that could not exist without the technology. So practices that are preferable and impossible without the technology, so dependent on the technology. So this is a kind of ascent through these various stages. However, this has been around as well for more than a decade, and it's been problematic in some ways. There's no explicit reference to teachers or students, and these boundaries of what is meant by substitution, augmentation, are not always clear. There's a lot of gray area between these boundaries. And why is this line here, you know? There's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of room for redefining these categories in terms of context of different schools. So still, I think that one of the things that seems to be useful in various programs is that it encourages some kind of forward-looking progress in taking innovations and technologies to a place where there are new possibilities. So just a few examples, kind of moving from the bottom of PowerPoint just as presentation instead of a whiteboard or blackboard, up through augmentation, where there might be more interaction possibilities with students, and modification, where students can actually work collaboratively inside the classroom or online, to some point where there might be international collaboration. And this is something that is really a new possibility, like in virtual exchange programs. We're even talking about having our international exchange online. So that really is a kind of redefinition. Okay. So because of the shortcomings that I just alluded to in SAMR, when it has been adopted in various schools and context, university context, it's often not adopted alone, but then it's wedded to various apps, technologies, or even other taxonomies. So you'll find these kind of Frankenstein frameworks where this graph tries to present all these apps which represent the SAMR model of progression at each level of SAMR, from substitution, augmentation, redefinition, and modification. So it becomes quite overwhelming often for staff members or teachers or participants in the professional development programs to see something like this. So I will often show this at the introduction of a professional development course for English teachers, for in-service English teachers here in Hong Kong, and then introduce them to the outline of the course. And they're often very relieved, you know, to realize that, well, we're not expecting them to learn all these apps or try to progress through all of these stages. So this kind of alignment in itself is an effort to solve some of the problems of the frameworks, but might create new problems. So what we have is the development of new frameworks again. So this one is called the Technology Integration Matrix. And this one has made a very systematic and concerted effort to try to overcome some of the ambiguities and deficiencies of the earlier models. And they've tried to do this by giving a little more description of context and a little more nuance to the stages that they're referring to. So we have 5 attributes of technology integration coupled with 5 attributes of learning environments on these different axes. I will not go into this in great detail. I think it's a very interesting framework if you're not familiar with it. And there are a lot of copyright-free resources available by the developers of this matrix. If you'd like to explore it further, they have videos for each one of these categories, and they have presentation materials. These slides that I'm using are available copyright-free for sharing. So there's a lot of thought and time that has gone into this, and I'll just give you a very quick overview. So we have the 5 characteristics of the learning environment on the y-axis, and these are different kinds of pedagogies proven to be effective in primary and secondary levels: active learning, collaborative learning, constructive learning, authentic learning, and goal-directed learning. So right away, you know, if you're in a different national context, you realize, well, some of the priorities of our local curriculum may not be addressed here, some of them are. And that also another issue about this matrix is they're not mutually exclusive. So you find that there is overlap, of course, between, say, authentic learning and collaborative learning. So where, you know, where do you pinpoint which category you're talking about? But I think as a way to kind of bring a little more nuance to an analysis of professional development and curriculum building, it's useful for discussion. So the other axis here is the 5 levels of technology integration. So this is a huge issue in adopting innovations and in introducing new technologies, is the range of experience, of receptivity, of training background. And so they break this down into 5 levels of entry level, adoption, adaptation, infusion, and transformation. And so you end up with this very comprehensive detailed matrix and some explanation of each one of these categories across the learner environment characteristics. And then, of course, across the levels of technology integration. So I think for the purpose of this seminar, just to look at a couple of examples is enough, where we might take this matrix and say, for example, using Pear Deck, which was introduced in the Blue 2 project a few weeks ago, in which some colleagues have started to adopt, we see that, you know, Pear Deck is a bit more than a traditional presentation tool, because it is designed to encourage more collaboration or interaction between students and teachers. But it doesn't go very far in terms of moving the locus of the activity of the classroom to the students. It's just a kind of collaborative adoption strategy. But something like Padlet might have more potential for giving students choice about how they share and what they share. So there, as you know, if you've used Padlet, they can share links, they can share video, they can share text, they can rate each other, they can comment on each other's work. And so there's much more potential for adaptation and collaboration among peers, not only between peers and teachers. Okay, and then you have some practices. So a lot of our standalone courses, which we mentioned earlier, are focused on introducing teachers to teacher-made content. So rather than using someone else's content effectively, how can teachers feel more confident in translating their own teaching content into things like teaching video, which has been very useful during the online teaching. And then the next stage of that, after they're confident and comfortable, would be to encourage and train their own students to create their content. So you move from a kind of constructive adaptation where the teachers are reinterpreting their content or reframing their content in video, and then inviting students to do the same. So you can move vertically as well as horizontally on this progressive matrix here. A couple more videos, which I won't show. I think some of you have seen these before, but just a couple of instances from our courses of teacher-made video and student-made video. Okay, now one more framework I just want to mention before I hand it over to Li Xun is this one, which in fact is not as much of a planning framework as it is a descriptive framework. So this one is a different animal altogether, in the sense that it was developed through an analysis, a macro analysis of teacher education programs and their practices of integrating new technologies and new technological pedagogies into the teaching and how they've done that. So instead of suggesting this kind of graph as a framework for organizational planning or professional development, it's a description of what the authors think are effective programs. So preparing pre-service teachers for technology use. At the first level, they offer role models, opportunities for reflection, instructional design, collaboration, and some kind of authentic experiences. So I think in a variety of ways, we see examples of all of these things at the Education University, but more or less in different programs and different departments and different projects. And this continues to description of more and more effective practices as you go toward the outer concentric circles. So that's just something of a different model in terms of using a framework as a description of practice, which is something we could do actually of our programs or our own projects after the fact. As we're winding things down, we might think of a framework as a kind of description of our own practice. Okay, there's one more framework we want to introduce, and I've saved the best for last. And Li Xun has a very good, authentic experience with this last model. So I'm going to hand it back over to you, Li Xun.
Okay, so what I'm sharing here, first, I'd like to quickly discuss what Tim has mentioned earlier about all these different models in teacher education. We've seen all those models, but there are all kinds of issues, difficulties using those models. For example, clarity. Some of the concepts are a bit vague and not easy to comprehend. Compatibility, so they may not suit certain contexts. Fruitfulness, okay, teachers, how useful it is to teachers. How can they use this model to actually assist their teaching? So that's another issue. And technological role, okay. Some of the models focus too much on technology instead of really student learning. So, and the scope, some of the scopes are just too broad. It's just covers too much and it becomes very hard to focus on. Or some are maybe too narrow, okay. And then the student focus, okay, as I said earlier, some of these models maybe focus too much on the teacher, but forgot about the role of the students in the whole model. So to address this, I just show you a few examples. For example, clarity, okay. Some of these models, they are not very clear for teachers to understand. Maybe too theoretical, like unintuitive. For example, the SMART, TIM, and TPACK, they provide a variety of levels of integration, but may not clearly define them or distinguish them from other levels. So sometimes the levels overlap and it's hard to understand the differences. And then most models include specific concepts that may be difficult for teachers to comprehend. For example, the bullseye area in the TPACK model, the technology, pedagogical, and the content knowledge area, it's highly abstract. It's difficult to comprehend maybe for teachers. And the substitution versus augmentation in the SAM model, or the transformation concept in the TIM model, can be difficult to comprehend, okay? And then fruitfulness, okay? There are models that lack fruitfulness, do not lead teachers to meaningful reflection, okay? For example, the SAM has 4 levels of integration. The TIM has 25 across 2 axes of like a lot of levels. For teachers, there's too many possibilities, particularly if non-hierarchical, can make a model confusing and cumbersome if the goal in their context is to help them quickly reflect on their practice and improve as needed. So if it's overly complicated, it's difficult for teachers to adopt. And student focus, as I mentioned earlier, some of this just focusing on technology adoption or teacher pedagogy goals rather than clarity on what students do or learn. So there is a kind of a mismatch there. So then Kiemans and his team, okay, came up with this new model, a PICRAT model. Actually, I have to thank LTDC. They brought Professor Charles Graham from Brigham Young University to our university. And I had a meeting with him and he talked to me about this online teaching practices. And he introduced this model to me. And so this model is trying to really critically review all the other models and trying to come up with a model that is clearer, okay, easier for teachers to adopt. like to try to improve the models. So this is the result. So what is the PIC-RAT model? So in this model, we have the PIC and we have the RAT. So the PIC stands for passive, interactive, and creative, okay, which describe students' different types of relationship with technology. And RAT stands for replaces, amplifies, and transforms, which describe teachers' different types of use of technology. Okay, this is the link to this article. You can read the details online. So basically, for the student, okay, the student can learn passively. Basically, okay, just receive information from the tutor or from the text course materials, or interactive learner. So the student actually interact with the content, the materials, or with the teacher or the peers. Okay, and then creative. The student interact with the peers, with the content, and then create new knowledge. Okay, construct new knowledge. So this is the student's role. And for the teacher, what does the teacher do? Okay, I can use this. It's like a computer programming, like a diagram. So just imagine you are using technology in your classroom, right? So you have to ask this question. Are the achieved learning outcomes of the activity clearly better than they would have been without the technology or via a lower tech solution? Okay, if the learning outcome is not much different, then you're basically just replacing like maybe printed material with like a PowerPoint, okay? So it's called replacement, okay? The teacher is just replacing traditional materials with an electronic version of that material, PDF files, etc., okay? So it's called replacement. But if actually this this technology is actually making the learning outcomes better, okay, than the traditional method, then if the answer is yes, then you further ask yourself, could the activity have reasonably been done without the technology or via low technical solution? Okay, for example, if you do a like shuffling activity, you cut a story, the sentence in a story into little pieces of paper, you give to students, ask them to reconstruct the story by putting the sentence in the correct order. You can do that using scissors and paper, but it's quite messy. If it's a lot of students, it's quite difficult to manage. But if you use computer, they do it drag and drop the sentence around the screen. There may be like pins popping up and etc. So the computer technology actually make this activity much more effective. So the teacher is like amplifying, okay, the learning activity, make it better than the traditional method. Okay, if without the technology you cannot achieve these learning outcomes, then we are talking about transformation. So you must rely on the technology to do this. Without the technology, you can't do it. Okay, that's transformation. So in my case, my course ENG 1324, that's the Introduction to Linguistics course. So I can just show you this example. Okay, this is the matrix, right? We have the PIC on the left and the RAT at the bottom. So for example, if I'm replacing the writing class notes on chalkboard with a PowerPoint presentation on screen, so basically I'm doing the PR, the bottom left, okay? The students are learning passively. They're just looking at my PowerPoint, okay? I'm just replacing the traditional chalk and board practice with PowerPoint, okay? So it's the bottom left PR, okay, part. But in my course, okay, I also guide students to write a wiki book on the topic Introduction to Linguistics. So the students, they co-construct the content of this book online, and they also get feedback from their peers and the online community on their Wikibook chapter. So they are actually peer editing each other's work, publish it online, and everybody can read, can comment, and they can improve. So we're talking about students are creating knowledge, so it's creative, and you have to use technology, the Wikibook technology, to make this happen. Okay, you can't do this in the classroom when everybody write on their paper. They can't share their writing in that manner. You have to use the wiki technology Everybody can edit each other's writing online simultaneously. They can read each other's online and then comment on the writing and then respond to that. So you have to rely on technology. So the teacher is transforming the learning experience for the students. So if you look at my course, I have all kinds of learning activities in my course. So you can basically match what you are doing with this matrix. For example, for a traditional PowerPoint, lecture PowerPoint, so it's the bottom left corner, the passive and replace square. But then if I use like Mentimeter, etc., to interact with students in the classroom, so it becomes interactive. Okay, the students interacting, but it's still basically like replacing what you can do in the classroom. You can just ask students face to face, like answer my question. Okay, and then, but you may say you can move this towards amplifies if the online technology really makes this practice much better than the physical like setting. For example, Padlet, some things you can't really do in the classroom. You immediately ask students to produce things together, discuss on Padlet. It's much more powerful than the classroom like face-to-face situation. So you can say the teacher's actually amplifying that kind of interaction. Okay, and then for creative and replace, so students can produce PowerPoint presentations. So they are creating their own PowerPoint, but instead of a classroom oral presentation, they do it using PowerPoint. Okay, and then if they do it like on Zoom, like what we see here, maybe you can move this further to here. So the students create, but then the learning experience has been amplified. They are actually using technology to effectively present their ideas online and to the audience, to the other students. Okay, and then for the bottom part, if you are developing, like for me, I developed quite a lot of like e-lectures, like MOOC style lecture, like mini MOOC on academic writing. So this kind of explanatory videos, you can give a lecture in the classroom for sure, but that's very limited, right? You can just talk to the students. You can't go out and create a scenery and a role play and all that. But in a video lecture, I can go to the library, I can use props, I can do all kinds of things. I can create animations. So it really amplifies the learning. Okay, students, they are still passively learning. They watch your lecture, but this lecture is more than a lecture in the lecture hall. You just stand in front of them and talking. So you can actually do things and they learn in a better way. Okay, or if you want to transform that, students can still learn passively, but if you have like a Zoom expert chat system, for example, I'm only one teacher who can teach my students. If I bring experts around me, okay, the students can make an appointment, go online, go on Zoom and consult these experts and to actually solve their problems. So that actually transforms the way they learn. They don't just learn from me, they learn from an online expert system. Okay, and then for I use VR, AR application in my course. Students go to the VR interface. For example, they want to learn about animal communications. So they can go into the natural world. They can go to play with the dolphins. They can listen to the dolphins. Okay, these kind of things you cannot do in the classroom. Okay, you have to rely on technology. So this is like you transform the learning and the students interact with a virtual world through technology. So we call this like interactive and transform part of this matrix. And then for the Wikibook project, of course, students, they create their Wikibook chapters and they interact with each other. They co-construct the content online and everybody in the class can read and comment, and then others can edit and contribute. So this is the highest of the top of the hierarchy, so the creative and transform part of the matrix. So I'm just demonstrating this to you. So that the benefits of PCRET, you can see that it's quite clear. So you understand all these concepts, quite easy to follow, and it's quite compatible. Okay, you can use this to match all kinds of situations, and it's fruitful. I think the teacher can look at this model and can think about their own practice, can easily match what they're doing with this model. And then they can also generate conversations among themselves of what can we do, okay, to improve our practice. And the scope is quite comprehensive. It covers the teacher, the students, and the different aspects. And it's very student focused. Everything we do is to enhance students' learning. You can see it very clearly. Okay, I hand it over to Tim to conclude today's sharing. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Li-Shun. Yeah, thanks a lot. So I think you can see from Li-Shun's sharing that the final framework is one that has considered a lot of the problems of the earlier frameworks. It has tried to address some of those. It's not necessarily perfect, but what we find is that the use of frameworks might have some usefulness across all the stages of curriculum and professional development and course planning. So in the example Li-Shun has just shown you there, I think it's fairly descriptive of what he's done in that course. And you can see that his course covers a wide spectrum of the matrix. Now, if he was just planning a new course, he might use the same model to think about what kinds of activities and assessment he will integrate, again, to kind of cover that spectrum. It can also be done in an evaluative way of existing courses. If you see it's all of the activities and integration of IT are clustering in the lower left-hand corner, it might be a time for kind of reevaluation of how IT is used in that course. But that's just for the individual course or instructor. It can also then start to have added value when you were communicating across different courses and especially across different departments. So in our TDG, for example, we have Chinese, literature, methodology, linguistics. We have undergraduate and graduate programs. We have in-service programs and pre-service programs. So to begin to kind of articulate across all of these different stakeholder groups and learn in principle from what others have done, I think we need some kind of common frame of reference. And so, you know, as a kind of map or language, I think these frameworks can be very useful. So, you know, finally, just if innovation is isolated, it might be either purely ornamental or it might evaporate. And so to really have sustainable, effective innovations, there has to be an organizational commitment, which I think we do have, but we also have to have some kind of language by which we all communicate across all of our very different practices, the good work that we're doing, and having some framework for making improvements as well. So this is why we propose these frameworks. Thank you again, Li-Shun, and it just about brings us to the end of the time, the 1 hour, but we would like to turn it over to you to ask if there are any questions or observations you have on this topic.
Li-Shun, just let me say something. This is Rebecca. Yeah, I just very appreciate your team and your presentation. You know, as a English teacher, actually I don't know much about this kind of framework. Actually, some of the terms I just learned today. I would say that this will be a very good review paper. Will you plan to publish somewhere? Maybe we could read later, yeah, in more detail. I think that's a very good, and also you use your example, your class example, course example, that will give us all some inspiration, yeah, how this kind of framework integrate to our class. Yeah, like me, actually, I use some Edpuzzle, some Centimeter, or some kind of online games, but actually I don't know much about the rationale behind. But through today's talk, I get more, more solid, rationale. I get some more foundation, when later on, when I apply all this, I know much about how really integrate technology, pedagogy, and subject knowledge into my course. So really appreciate. Yeah, this is just my comment. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
I do have a question.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi. So thank you so much for the sharing, and I think it's very enriching, enlightening to discover really that there are so many frameworks that are emerging to help teachers think about their practices and understand the evolution of the practices. And I think as teachers, it can be a bit overwhelming, but it's probably a necessary exercise to think in those theoretical terms. But really what I am interested in my online teaching practice is really try to understand the opinion, the view, the experience of the learners. And I think it's something, a little bit of a blurry area, and especially not the theoretical learner or the abstract conceptual learner, but really our learners. And, we do have some tools for evaluation, like the sets, or maybe if we created some packages, then we have an evaluation. But I still don't really have a clear picture somehow of this, and I think this is lacking in my theoretical understanding of what I am doing. Really, this is something that is crucial.
I think that's a very good observation. Thank you, Alice. I think that I would just say that the frameworks for some colleagues in a school or a faculty or a program are a kind of starting point for a conversation, with colleagues who are participating in this process in a variety of ways. And so it is true, I would say, that the frameworks don't explicitly invite the student perspective, but more, or would be more inclined to ask colleagues to describe their current practices, plan forward, and understand what others are doing. So I'll bring in Christina's question here because I think it's related. She wrote, the PICRAT is a clear model, but still closely related to the subject content. And I think that's true as you begin to kind of flesh out a description like Li Xun's example of his Introduction to Linguistics class. In that context, the subject content is quite foregrounded. But if we shared, for example, from a Chinese teacher or liberal studies teacher or a primary math teacher, I think that the framework is flexible enough that they could redefine what content means in the context of that framework. And this is the kind of usefulness, the pragmatic usefulness of the framework, is that it's flexible enough that we can talk across all these differences, but it's theoretical enough, that we can kind of talk about the differences from our respective subject areas and our practical needs in terms of the technology. So going back to your question, Alice, I think that we have to find ways in these projects and in the planning and also sharing platforms like our website to more explicitly invite and include the perspective of students, because I don't think we're going to necessarily get that from the frameworks. That's not really the purpose that they serve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks to Rebecca regarding your question. Yeah, certainly Tim and I, we are exploring this actually, these models. So it certainly is a good idea. Maybe we can work out a paper together and relate to some real practices here in this university, not only ours, but other colleagues. So we can maybe collect views from colleagues to see if we can come up with a paper that share these thoughts. Okay, so everybody can read the paper and learn. Okay, yeah, that's possible. Yeah, I think a colleague talk about the transformation part, transforming student learning. That is the hardest actually. So I think we all are very comfortable regarding like replacement and amplifying. Okay, make these things a bit better, but really transform student learning. and you have to put in extra effort. You have to explore in the most innovative methods, like virtual reality and like Google Map and like a real-time location technology, all kinds of technologies that we normally don't think about in our teaching, but they have potentials, and you have to keep exploring and try them out, and then whether it's effective or not, I guess you have to maybe survey the students, collect feedback from students. And for example, the Wikibook project, we have been doing this for many years. We did research on this several times. We did questionnaire surveys, we interviewed the students, we learned a lot from students' feedback. So many of them felt like the ownership of learning is really the key. Okay, they own that book. So the students finish the course, they've written a book together by themselves in year one university students. So how many of us have written a book as professors, right? So this is extremely like a proud learning product. So if you have that kind of assessment design, so you know that this is really meaningful, and they really care about their part of this project, like the chapter they've written, and because it's publicly viewable, so they can't really plagiarize and steal and like do it carelessly, because everybody wants to if it's under public eyes, okay, you care about it, so you put a lot of effort into it, and everybody else, when they read the book online and they critically evaluate the book, they realize what they can learn by evaluating other people's products. So, and even the peer evaluation, peer commenting process is a great learning opportunity. Okay, so all these things, you have to rely on this kind of online technology to realize. So this kind of practices means we are transforming learning using technologies. We can't do that in the classroom. So that's how you judge. Okay, so can this be done without the technology? Okay, if not, we do it with technology, and is this really effective? Do students really benefit from this? Because you can use very advanced technology, but it may not help students. Okay, they may not be able to learn effectively. It's just very interesting or fun, but may not be very beneficial to learning. So you have to really consider very carefully. Okay, the technology really contribute to students' learning and transform their learning experience. And I think if you do this systematically, you should at least survey the students and interview the students for a few times to find out whether students really benefit from this, instead of just do it and you don't know whether they like it or not. Okay, I think you have to collect feedback and then keep improving. That's what we did. Okay, the whole concept has been improved again and again over the years. So you just have to keep exploring and fine-tuning and collecting views from different parties, and then keep up to date. Okay, you have to attending seminars, read things. Yeah, we learn this ourselves from other people, like Wikibook concept. So every time you attend some sharing, and so you get some ideas, maybe you can put that into practice and then try it out. I think just try. Okay, there's no harm trying. If it fails, it doesn't matter. Okay? You just need to be not to be afraid of making mistakes, and that's the only way to innovate and to progress. Yes. Okay, Tim, do you have any?
Just very briefly, thank you, Li-Shun. I'm just reminded from some of these questions of how important collaboration is, because some of the questions like, how could we evaluate transforming teaching? I mean, Li-Shun, your answer really goes to the heart of integrating technology and how we can evaluate whether or not the activities or the course itself is transformed through technology, if it is achieving some kind of possibilities or outcomes that weren't possible without it. But there's other kinds of transformation that we're interested in, which may be this is an external transformation. There's also internal transformations, which I think the question is alluding to a little bit, which is, how good is it for the students' internal educational process? And I think for that, there's no guarantees. You can put, you can throw seeds into different kinds of soil and see if they grow. And this is part of the ongoing process of trial and error, that we don't know if using virtual reality or augmented reality or Pear Deck or Padlet is actually going to help the learning efficacy of the students. We think so, but we have to have other ways to evaluate. So we need the colleagues in assessment and psychology and evaluation to lend other perspectives here. I think they're very important. I think that these frameworks are really meant just that, like as a framework for planning and conversation and discussion around the area of encouraging innovation and integration of new technologies and planning forward to do that. But certainly, we need the insights from a lot of different educators to have a very comprehensive evaluation. So I think another question was related to this same topic. From the perspective of activity organizer, the models are useful, but how can we know students actually learn the way we plan? And I don't think that would be the explicit role of the framework to determine that. I think we need other instruments for that purpose.
Yeah, thanks. Also, somebody asked about how to engage students and how to make increase interaction while teaching online completely. Like, this is a big question. Everybody's asking this question. We're teaching online completely now. Mm-hmm. It's really hard. Sometimes we feel like we're talking to thin air, okay, that kind of thing. I think there's no one answer to that. So the whole learning has to be a big package. You don't rely on one thing. You don't just, okay, use Padlet, okay, use the chat room. Okay, those are very useful to interact with the students, but students can interact with the online materials. For example, you use Edpuzzle video lecture. So when they watch the lecture, the quiz question pop up in the middle of the lecture. They have to answer the question and then move on to the next thing. And this is hugely popular. I was surprised. It's just very simple concept, but the students evaluated the Edpuzzle lectures very high in my course. We love the Edpuzzle video lecture because we're not just listening to the teacher. We have to keep on trying to think about the content and then respond to the questions and then progress. And that's instant feedback. Okay, a kind of interaction with the content. It's very interactive because students find it very helpful. And then other things like students can interact. For example, the VR page online. Okay, they can explore like the world map of the world Englishes. They can go to different countries on the world map and listen to English, Indian people listening, speaking Indian English. So you develop those kind of environment. The student can interact with the online materials. If they find this interactive, they will do it. They will explore. If they just read text, they don't do anything, it's less engaging and students may not like it very much. So it's like a whole range of things you do in your course, okay? Not simply just in the classroom and just talking to them. That's not the only way to interact, okay? So many possibilities.
And I think we have to be prepared, yeah. For a variety of circumstances, as we have seen very well in this last year. So that, for example, I teach a writing class, which depends very heavily on peer feedback, interaction, community kind of building within the course. And that the pedagogy of that course was devastated by online learning because we always would sit in small group circles and faced one another, and sometimes the sharing was extremely authentic because it's a writing your life class. So people were really talking about meaningful issues to them. And then suddenly it was online. And you can imagine students weren't using their cameras. They don't even know who each other is. And then they're invited to have this kind of intimate sharing. It just doesn't work. So really, but fortunately, because, Li Shun and I had been involved in this for a while, I had some fundamental in terms of alternatives that I could try out. So I really felt like that first semester, it was just a Petri dish, of trying out all of the different possibilities. And I'm teaching it again this semester, and I would still prefer the face-to-face pedagogy for this course. But in just one semester, I was able to come a long way back to achieving some of the original outcomes that were achieved in that face-to-face. And it was just knowing some of the resources and technological possibilities that were there. And I would say I'm only doing that not to increase the efficiency or interaction, but because I have to. And in this particular course, I would still go back to face-to-face. But if I didn't have that choice, I'm very encouraged to see that the kind of community building within the course and the sharing among peers is still quite rich and possible through some of these technologies.
Yeah, by the way, don't forget about discussion forums. I think we don't use that enough in our teaching. It's a great platform for students to interact with each other and with the tutor. But many tutors feel that, they won't post messages and all that worries, but they will. Okay, the only thing is you produce very thought-provoking, for example, video lectures. So they watch the content, they kind of like, wow. Then they want to express their thoughts on that. So then you open those discussion forums attached to different video lecture segments, and then you have some guiding questions, guide them to think about it. Okay? For example, word Englishes. Are you aware of your own accent? What's your personal feeling towards your accent? And they want to tell you what they feel, what's their own experience. Maybe they feel embarrassed or whatever. And then this discussion will start, and everybody will feel the same or they feel differently. They start discussion, and the student, trust me, when they are passionate about the topic, they are really willing to contribute to the online discussion. And that is another great way for asynchronous interaction among students themselves and with the tutor. So I think all of us should make good use of discussion forums, okay, to engage meaningful interaction among students. And then also the online commenting system. Yeah, that's another good thing. So if you ask students to produce some kind of group work, they put them online and everybody else can watch, can read, can evaluate. Then they comment on their work. That's another great way to communicate among the students. So you don't have to be there to do all the interaction work. So the student can interact among themselves. That is actually very important. So the teacher must create this environment, this online environment, that they have the opportunity to interact if they want to. So yeah, that's the one of the things I do in my course. So okay.
I think I'll just make one final comment, which is I think that a sharing like this, a lot of it really is at the level of the kind of planning and description, broad description, at the theoretical level, and kind of discovering how the frameworks are useful for that. But where the concrete help sometimes comes is in the instances, like Li Shun's examples of the online forum and from his linguistics class 1324. So one of the questions, Loretta, I don't know if she's still here though, is will we apply the model and share the experiences? And yes, that's actually an emphatic yes, because this is actually the first step in the project, which is intended to do just that, so that we're moving in the direction of having, some more specific examples of apps or innovative pedagogies that are linked to specific courses and outcomes. So stay tuned. We'll have a website, and we're sharing this not only with FHM and project members, but with the whole university community. So we definitely welcome your participation and also your sharing. If you have other good examples, we'll be happy to share those on our platform as well.
Yes, yeah, the university has already recommended a range of key apps like Nearpod, Edpuzzle, and all this. Many colleagues are already having accumulated very rich experiences like Pear Deck. So we will invite all these colleagues and to gradually share their good practices and put this like a showcase of good practices on our website, and then we hope everybody can benefit from this platform. I think we're well over the time limit. Okay, so thank you for all coming to today's sharing session. So we will keep you updated regarding the sharing materials. We have recorded the sharing. We'll put it on our website, and then the PowerPoint we can also share with you all. So no worries. Okay, you will get a copy, and we will keep in touch then. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.